So some of the comments were very disturbing, and I didn't know how to handle that. So to answer your question, how would I tell people to deal with that? I don't think I dealt with it right away, because you don't know how to deal with that when your own is doing that, like, oh my
Yeah.
God, to receive that much disrespect, and especially at the beginning of your career, that's no one trains you for that, on how to navigate and deal with that experience.
Hello, Trisha. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Good to see you. Good to see you here. And for
You
anybody listening and for anybody that is not yet familiar with who you are and what you do, could you introduce yourself to us?
So again, my name is Trisha C-McMurray. I am out of New Jersey. I'm in northern section of New Jersey. I am a world language teacher. I'm at the elementary level. I teach grades 1 through 4, but I do have prior experience teaching at the middle school level as well as the high school. And now, well, actually, when I graduated college years ago, I did start off in elementary. I took a detour in career, and then came back to the public school system, like I said, middle and high school, and now I'm back at elementary level. So, like I said, I'm a Spanish teacher, grades 1 through 4, but even beyond that professional title, I consider myself to be uh, a language and cross-cultural communicator. I don't just feel the need to teach language, but also to fuse language and culture together and expose my students to the richness and the diversity, in particular, of Latin America and the Caribbean. So that's what I do right now.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we were slightly talking about this before, but why is that significant for you to, like you said, combine the language and the culture, and especially from those regions? Why?
I think it's important to fuse language and culture, because language is influenced by culture. And as it relates to Latin America, well, let me break it down piece by piece. In terms of Latin America, learning a language pays off. It has benefits for those who are going into just a regular whatever profession someone has. If they know a different language, that's an asset. But also it's important to know, sometimes professionals are sent away to a Spanish speaking country for work, and maybe they're in Argentina and they have been exposed to one form of Spanish, and then they try to communicate, and then they find out that even though it's Spanish, there's different words that are used. Then they find themselves in a conflict. So I think it's important to understand that whereas these 21 Spanish speaking countries do speak Spanish, the other influences that have shaped Latin America have influenced the way Spanish is being spoken. And I think students should be exposed to that richness and diversity. The same thing with when I speak about the Caribbean, that'll be more related to when I teach ESL. I don't want to just expose kids to American English, but Caribbean English, especially since that's my background. So I have that background knowledge and exposure. So again, even though everyone's speaking a British English or a British Creole English, the different influences that shape each island shape the way people speak English. And one country says one word one way, another island says it a different way. So to me, I think that's very important. Language and culture go hand in hand in everything. And it's not just one dimensional, it's multidimensional, it's dynamic. And that's what I'm all about.
Perfect. Perfect. Fantastic. And there is something, Trisha, that I very, very much love that you talk about, and I think those are your mottos. Hopefully you can tell us a little bit more about these. I really love both of them. Be the change you wish to see in the world, and the way you see yourself is the way you see other people. Could you deep dive a little bit into those?
Definitely. And I thought those questions were very profound. My first one, it's been almost 20 plus years. I was introduced to the Creative Way book, and it's a way for creative people that have people have writer's block, people also have creative block. So the book, by the end of the book, you were supposed to find out where you are creatively, what your passion is, and what direction you want to go. And the end project was a vision board. And on this vision board, part of that vision board, it turned out to be my trademark, who I am as a person. And through doing this vision board, some of the quotes that stood out to me was from Gandhi: "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And then this was self-inspired. The way you see yourself is the way you see other people. So how I apply that to myself personally and to my profession, as a first generation American from an immigrant family, and especially as one of color, I'm in a unique position. So I already know firsthand that I have to negotiate my identity as well as the right to teach Spanish compared to a mainstream Latina. When I say a mainstream Latino, like someone that looks like J Lo or Sofia Vergara, like they're an obvious Latino, right? Or even someone who's a non-Latino teacher, you know. I am, the beginning of my journey, I have not been reactive to this, but proactive. Any negative experience I face, I like to transform it into something positive. It fuels my passion even more to educate people and even my students who challenge me more so in my teaching profession than anyone else about the way we look at Latin America and the Caribbean. And the people as well as the progeny within it. So, for example, I'll give you some examples. I used to work for Berlitz Corporation. At that point, there were several entrepreneurial journeys that I tried to navigate and go through. One of which was having my own language company. And so I had the experience as a language teacher, but I wanted to transition into management. So I worked out of the Princeton location, but I try to be proactive and be available for all types of assignments. Sometimes I'll go to Philadelphia, I'll be in Princeton, which was my home base, but also go to Rockefeller. And as a teacher, you could take free language classes, other languages. I love Brazilian Portuguese, I love Mandarin Chinese. And so there was a period of time where I would go to Rockefeller Center to take classes. And it was interesting because when I would go there and meet the teachers there and introduce myself, they automatically knew who I was. But what was interesting though, the reception wasn't that warm, they knew who I was. But not only that, they were like, oh, I know who you are. And then the passing comment would be, I wouldn't teach Spanish if I didn't know the language, so somehow the word got around who I was,
Right.
and people could not reconcile in their mind that I could be a Spanish teacher because of my phenotype. So a lot of times at that time, to maybe certain periods of time, maybe I was getting more English teacher assignments rather than Spanish teacher. So because
Certainly.
Black equals English, Black does not equal. So that's some of the experiences that like I've gone through. Even like some friends that found out that I was a Spanish teacher, kind of again, I wouldn't teach the language if I didn't know it because people don't understand that there are people that look like me that are native speakers of Spanish, are Latino, are descendants of Latinos. So like I said, I take those unique experiences and I try to transform them into something positive. What's interesting, like I tell you that I have to negotiate my identity in that regard as it relates to Spanish. What's also interesting is in terms of the Caribbean aspect, I might have more of a privilege over other West Indians or other Caribbean people that are non-Black. So what I mean by that, you have Indo-Caribbean community, very strong after slavery in the West Indies, the enslaved Africans were replaced by indentured labor from India, so as a result, you have West Indians who are Indian, but maybe if they're trying to teach a Caribbean class, they wouldn't be taken seriously because they're like, well, how could you be from the Caribbean and you look like you're Indian? How could you be West Indian? So even though I'm not Indo-Caribbean, they are a part of me. We share the same cultural background. And I would equally be an advocate for someone like that because I understand the journey, the navigation process of identity, the complexities of identity. So that's what I mean when I say be the change you want to see in the world. If I feel like these experiences are wrong and people have certain narrow-minded ways of thinking about things, I feel like if I don't like that, then I need to set the example by providing an education, whether it's informally or formally, outside the classroom, inside the classroom, wherever, no matter what I do, I like to set the example to inspire, not force change in people, but inspire change in people to change the way they look at people and culture and heritage just in general, So and then my own self-inspired quote, the way you see yourself is the way you see other people. I see myself as someone who is very proud of who I am as a Black woman from a racial standpoint and from a multicultural standpoint. I'm proud of myself as a British West Indian American, in particular from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and as a Central American of Panamanian American descent on my mom's side. But that pride that I have in myself equally carries over into my acknowledgement and pride and appreciation for other groups of people. There's some people that are so proud of who they are that they're kind of like prejudiced towards other people. They're just so ethnocentric. That's not me. Like, I'm very proud of who I am, but at the same time, I make room to appreciate other people. That's always who I've been, so I pride myself on the ability not to allow my pride to outweigh my acknowledgement and appreciation for other cultures, heritages, and people other than my own. And I think what's very important for me, to remind myself every day that I have the ability to love and respect other people equally, even if they're prejudiced, because I'm being guided by God first and foremost. And we're all God's children, and all God's children are not the same. We're all very diverse. So I even beyond what I'm passionate about, I like to be led by Him, because I believe that He's given me the gifts to do what I do today. And to keep pushing forward, even though I may face some type of adversity or something like that, both personally and professionally in my career. So,
Certainly. Certainly,
yeah.
Trisha. And I would really love to get your opinion on how you do that, because like you said, that you are very proud of who you are, proud of your heritage, and I'm thinking of anybody potentially listening to this that is not proud of themselves, not proud of their heritage, not proud of where they come from. What could you recommend to somebody like that to perhaps maybe change the way that they see themselves, change the way that they see their own native country? What could you recommend to somebody like that?
These principles, or the quotes that I just mentioned to you,
Mm-hmm.
they've guided my career over the past 24 years in areas of magazine publication. So, for example, a lot of times you will see people growing up that struggle with their identity because they don't feel accepted within the American landscape, and constantly, say, I'm not American enough. I'm not, let's say their families from uh Mexico. I'm not Mexican enough for the Mexicans. I'm not American, like, so they struggle. And so in the beginning of my career, I was a teacher, but I saw my father as an immigrant. He worked very hard, and I knew I admired that work ethic in him, but I knew as especially the child of immigrants, wanted more than that 9 to 5 job. So I was like, what can I do to inspire people to be proud of themselves? And a lot of times you'll hear people growing up, I didn't see images of myself in the media or in the magazine. So in the early days of my career, I wanted to have my own magazine publication, and I did take some steps towards that. Um, from the West Indian standpoint, you're either a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or a teacher or a banker, right? So I'm very creative. So, most Caribbean people is kind of like, being creative is kind of like, in their mind, is like, it's not practical. And it makes no sense, and maybe you have no ambition. So I felt like my family didn't really understand. So I just kind of like
Yeah.
followed my own journey. So I try to reconcile in my mind that, okay, I would pursue the magazine publication thing, but get an advanced degree in it. So at NYU, they had a master's. It was like an MBA for magazines, either magazine, you could specialize in magazine or book. And so I went to pursue that. The master's thesis would be your business plan, and there you would make connections with people that would help you to launch whatever you want to do. I was also inspired by Latina magazine founder Chrissy Haubeger, who was Mexican American, but she was adopted by a white family, but they still instilled in her a sense of Mexican American pride. And she didn't see images of herself in the media. So she eventually started her own magazine. And I was so inspired by that. Luckily, I was able to get an internship there. Unfortunately, I did face some adversity there. And it was also the time when they were about to go transition from print to online. So then I was like, okay, maybe this vehicle won't work in terms of trying to inspire first generation Americans of different heritages to be proud of themselves. What can I do next? At the same time, I'd also applied for the master's in Latin American Caribbean Studies at NYU, but I deferred for a year. And when I faced that challenge, I decided just to continue on in that program. And so I ended up getting my master's in Latin American Caribbean Studies. If I finish a few more courses, I will technically have 2 masters, so who knows? But I also had a goal of going straight to a PhD because I'm very passionate about this, you know. So that's one way I try to inspire others, because unlike myself, there's other, like I told you, there's some people that are so ethnocentric, that are proud of their heritage at the exclusion of other cultures. And then you have others who are not proud of what their heritage is, and they hide who they are, you know. So for those people, you know, I've had some friends that, you know, let's say they were half Cuban and half Guatemalan or something like that, right? And maybe they had a bad experience with one family member that was part of that heritage, so they rejected that side of themselves, or maybe other people didn't like their culture, so they hid that side of themselves, and that hurt me, you know, because I was like, it shouldn't be that way. And then I had other people that I clearly knew growing up that are of Caribbean descent, and I see them in their element, they know their culture, they're very connected, but when they're around mainstream American society, they completely bash their culture, and it's almost like they never were part of it. And I was like, I don't like that. I need to be the change I want to see in the world. Like, get people to be proud to be American, but also be proud of your heritage, you know. And so magazine publication was the way to do it. Another avenue that I kind of try to explore was restaurant ownership. um Everyone loves food, right? food food and music bring people together, you know.
Indeed.
So again, like one time, this was my teens, me and a good family friend, we went to Maryland, the two families, and we discovered this restaurant. It was a pan-ethnic Asian restaurant, and I just love the concept. Like, in that restaurant, they had a food court, or a bar, like a buffet.
Hmm.
Korean, Malaysian food, Chinese food, Indian food, Indonesian food, Filipino food, and I never saw that before. And so that sparked my interest to say, wow, Caribbean food is so diverse. When people think of the Caribbean, they just think Jamaican food, but there's Trinidadian food, Vincentian food, where my dad is from, you know, Bahamian food, you know, like in terms of Spanish, Puerto Rican, Guatemalan, Mexican, Costa Rican, Cuban, you know. So I wanted to do something like that too. Anytime I saw people that, like I said, Latin American Caribbean culture is so diverse, and it hurt me so much to see people not proud of who they are, that my passion just like was big. Like, I wanted to put it everywhere, you know. So I was using my 20s to just try to figure it out, what vehicle would be the best way to do that, you know, so people could start to embrace who they are. Language services, I thought I would have my own language company. Again, how I would apply that to language services, um, and like provide services where people are doing businesses in different countries, they have access to translators, interpreters that could translate the material in a particular Spanish language pair. You know, if they're doing business in Argentina, have Argentinian, you know, that's what I was passionate about, you know. So, you know, my life came full circle. I realized that I had a lot of these passionate goals and these vehicles that I wanted to put that passion in. But at the end of the day, we also got to think about not only what we're passionate about, but what our value set is. You know, corporate America and, you know, venture capital, you know, seeking those things is great, but very cutthroat, you know. So you have to, I'm also very family oriented. Even when I was trying to navigate the whole thing with language services, I like the end product of translation, but it's a very solitary experience. I'm an only child, but as I got older, I realized that human connections are very important. So being in that situation, I didn't know if I would be a successful translator, because I value community and connections. So is that the right vehicle to put my passion in, you know? Maybe interpretation would be better because you're out there, you're around people, you know. So not only do you have your passion and your goals, you have to match them with your value set too. So now that I'm in my 40s, now I've come full circle back into education, and I'm about to be a mother, this makes sense for me. Like, the teaching profession, you know, the summer's off, where now what I want to do to help first generation Americans of Latin American Caribbean descent specifically, but just first generation Americans of immigrants, period, to embrace and appreciate who they are, is have my own private language practice. But part of that brand extension is having an immersion program experience where they're going to the different Spanish speaking countries. For ESL students, being exposed to Caribbean English, going to the Caribbean countries and create partnerships with people where we could have an immersion trips in the summer. That way they're exposed to their culture, the language. If they felt insecure speaking it growing up, maybe they don't feel they're fluent enough. Because in the classroom, in the school system, it's very bad. There's no appreciation for language. But I feel if I get them out of that environment and put them in the country that speaks the language, immerse them in the culture, they will have a greater appreciation. So whether you're a first generation American or not, I feel all kids, especially American kids, should be exposed to different languages, but especially those first generation of immigrant experience who automatically are multicultural by default, but to not be able to embrace all that, that's like that's sad, so I want these children to embrace and love who they are. And so I've come full circle, and now I see where I could put my passion for language and culture to work, not just as a 9 to 5 Spanish teacher, but having my own language practice and immersion program, and whatever else comes stems from that. So that's how I try to help that audience in particular to feel better about themselves, culturally, in terms of their heritage, their multicultural identity.
And I think this plays very nicely into something else that I wanted to get your opinion on, Trisha, because I feel like what you said here, that a lot of these kids, especially immigrant kids, they have that, like you said, that multiculturalism, but very often also that bilingualism by default, which is a wonderful gift. But for anybody that is learning it on purpose, perhaps it be kids, for example, what you were talking about before, that you work with younger children, but also any adults out there that are looking to learn another language. I feel like mindset plays a huge role when we are trying to do that. And from your experience, I suppose that you probably have had some challenges yourself potentially with that vehicle. So what would you say is the role of mindset on language learning, or in learning in general, maybe not just languages?
Mindset and perspective is very important, because if you just have that one track mind, in terms of language, again, like I said, in terms of business too, like if you just think generically in terms of language, that's where communication becomes there it becomes a conflict in communication, because you could offend someone in one Spanish speaking country versus another, using certain words and stuff that mean one thing in one place and another and in another part of the Spanish speaking world. So one thing that came to mind when I was reviewing this question, like for example, in terms of a country like island, like a Spanish speaking nation like Puerto Rico, um so heavy African influence, and their indigenous people were the Taino Indians that have shaped the Spanish spoken there. Um, and even the words that are used that are clearly a sign of African influence. But then you go over to Argentina, and the Spanish is heavily influenced. It's still Spanish, but heavily influenced by Italian. And so some of the words that are used there in Argentina are not the same that would be used in Puerto Rico. So I think a lot of teachers need to start changing. And it could be, unfortunately, world language is put on a back burner in terms of public education, like math, science, everything else is at the forefront. And like if there's a budget cut, world language is the first to go. Especially at the elementary level, I see them once a week for 42 minutes. So maybe with those time constraints, maybe that just leads teachers to let's just focus on the language and forget about the culture. But as you go up higher in the levels where there's more time, I just really feel like teachers need to change their mindset in terms of that. And I am very proud and honored that I share this field with other world language teachers that do share the same passion that I do. We have Rosa Bell out of Hawaii. And you have Jennifer Saldana White. Same thing. Her specialty is like Afro Latinidad in language instruction. And you have Jessie Felice, who's a Black American. She's passionate about Black Americans in particular. That's her audience, learning a different language. But one common thread is they feel it's very important to fuse culture in there too. And so part of their business outside of teaching is doing immersion programs for teachers, not just the students, but for teachers to have like a PD. It's like a PD and an immersion experience at the same time, to go to a particular Spanish speaking country and get your own real world education about the language and the culture of that particular Spanish speaking country, and then bring it back into the classroom, you know? So that's what I would say um would be the role of mindset and perspective on language learning. You know, if you're just thinking that only the language is important, your students are missing out on an opportunity to make connections between cultures, you know, commonalities between the different Spanish varieties as well as the differences, but celebrating those differences, not that one is better than the other, but I think it's very important. And then it will ultimately help them to understand why people look so diverse in Latin America, because now they can make connections with the language and the culture. You know, like again, like I said with Puerto Rico, the African influence came particularly from Nigeria, the country of Nigeria, you know. So if Nigerians are learning Spanish, that I think that's a good connection there, that they can see how their culture had influenced the Spanish of Puerto Rico. You know, because if you go to Spain, that's like the pure Spanish, right? But then you go to Puerto Rico, the influence of the African influence or the Taino influence shapes, and that's what makes it a variety, you know. Um, so yeah, I think, and one last point, a lot of teachers might feel like teaching Spain Spanish is important, but we live in the United States of America. No one is really speaking that
Sure.
variety, even though it is the mother tongue. You have to respect the mother tongue, but you have people from, you know, the Spanish speaking Caribbean, Mexico, Central America, and stuff like that. You know, so having that mindset and that perspective is not good, you know. And I say that if I was a French teacher too. Don't just teach European French, teach Haitian Creole, teach French from Martinique, you know, like that's the mindset and the perspective that I want teachers to kind of, you know, I want how I want them to reframe the way they are thinking about how they're delivering language in the class, in the world language classroom.
And that's really important, I would say, for anybody that is learning the language for themselves as well, because I very often have students come to me and, oh, should I learn American English or should I learn British English or maybe some other variety? And I say, you know, it just depends on where you're going and what your particular circumstances are. Because if you're moving, let's say, to Australia and you're learning British English, then I mean, you might as well just learn Australian English. So just depending on where you're coming from and why you're doing it in the first place. So of course, that's a very, very good point, certainly. And in terms of, like you said, people that are stuck potentially in that way of thinking that okay, it's just the language, not really focusing too much on the culture, what would you say can help with that? So let's say, for example, what you were talking about, certain teachers that potentially don't see the value of culture within that, but potentially any other quote unquote harmful thinking patterns. How would you go about changing those? And again, maybe not necessarily just in language, maybe in any other ways of life. For example, what you were talking about before with business, potentially starting your own business, even at work, if you are stuck with a certain thinking pattern, a certain way of seeing the world, like you said, even coming back to thinking that your culture, your heritage is potentially better than others. How would you work with that? Or again, what could you recommend to anybody that is stuck in that, that perhaps wants to change the way or they think or they see that it's maybe not the best way to think, but they just don't know how to go about changing their mindset, changing their thinking patterns? What would you say is a good way of doing that?
I think I would encourage them, if they have business or just business in life, to travel if they can. You know, ideally it would be great. Travel 4 times a year. Now, okay, for me in particular, I had an ex world language supervisor. She was of Chilean and Venezuelan descent. Her mom was from Venezuela, her father was from Chile. So even though she had exposure, she knew the importance of keeping up with her Spanish, because if you don't continue with it, even though she was a world language professional, you're gonna lose it, you know. So she focused her vacations every summer on going to a different Spanish speaking country, right? So I equally feel the same way too. Like for me, as someone of British, West Indian, and Central American descent, to visit a different Spanish speaking country to keep up with my Spanish and also be exposed to the variety of Spanish visit a different Caribbean country just to, not just St. Vincent, not by default St. Vincent because that's where my family's from, but other other Caribbean countries too, just to maintain my heritage. But I'm born here in this country. I am an American too. So I'm a Jersey girl in particular, but it's not enough just to know New Jersey, get to know the whole nation, the West Coast, the East Coast, the Midwest, And as I said to you before, make time in that travel to visit a country that's not of your own culture or background to make you a well-rounded person. So that's the advice that I would give someone that is struggling with that mindset. Um, and especially would benefit them in business because they could write it off those travel. But even just on a personal level, I just think that would be the best advice that I would give, you know, um, to someone to kind of change that mindset. And again, it has to be them to be the one to make that step, you know. And for some people, there's some people within this country that never even left their state or their town, and are pretty much content with that, you know. And so sometimes people like that you can't change, you know. But like for those who are in business or professionals, you know, that's what I would do to kind of help them change that mindset.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I'd love to explore that a little bit deeper with what you are talking about, potentially people of two heritages, or even perhaps more than that, having that multiple heritage background, so to speak. And so with that, what I often notice with people, what we were just talking about, being proud of yourself, right? And I notice a lot of people trying to muffle, and I think you said the same thing before, that a lot of people try to suppress and to muffle their heritage because they're with another group of people. Maybe it's not cool, maybe it's not well looked at, what you were talking about before, that, oh, I'm from this particular country, oh, why are you here? So I can very much understand that, and I can see that happening. And so to anybody within that environment, within that situation themselves, what do you think is the best way to balance those things? Because of course, like you said, being from the US and living there, of course, it's a part of you, it's part of who you are, it's part of how you behave, how you speak, and so on. But then in the same token, you can't just fully immerse yourself in that and forget your heritage. But then vice versa, you can't really be doing the opposite either, just fully focusing on where you're from, not where you are right now. And so how do you, perhaps maybe we can start with your own experience of how you balance that, or with your experiences potentially with other people from different countries, different cultures within the US, or again, perhaps any other countries. How do you balance those two things?
Mhm. Well, so funny you say that because it's like people kind of remind you, like because yeah, I'm born here, and I think I experienced this more when I was younger. I'm born here, but yet people are throwing me like to my country of heritage. Oh, but aren't you from over there? Yeah, but I'm born here. But then to your family, like, oh, you're American, so you're like bounced all over the place. So it's like you have to be proactive on your own. You have to have that strength within yourself, um, to be able to navigate those complexities and those negotiations of identity. So for me, um, as far as the West Indian part, and I mentioned this in an interview with Simone that I had with her, that like I said, my dad is from St. Vincent. But when they went to, either you go to England for school or you go to the University of the West Indies. So there were some people from St. Vincent that went to the University of West Indies in Jamaica, and there you made friends with people from all the different islands. And so they come to the US, they build up their professions, they have their kids, and they were very strategic in having these things called card parties. Once a month, they would rotate to each family, a different family's house, and all of them had kids, all of us. So they were very strategic in having us be exposed to our culture, especially as first generation Americans, you know. And so not only was I exposed to Vincentians, but like the other groups, Jamaicans, Trinidadians, people from Barbados. So I was lucky to automatically be, that was like a gift to me, to all of us. We, up to this day, we talked about it recently. We're so proud that our parents exposed us to that, We take such pride in that. Not every Caribbean American had that exposure. Or if they did, like let's say their family was from Jamaica, they were just only around Jamaicans, or their family was from Guyana, only around Guyanese. But I was around my own Vincentians as well as other Caribbean groups. That's why when I go out into the world, people are so surprised. Wow, like you know what you're talking about, like I could easily feel comfortable, so that was a benefit to me. As far as Panama, my mom and her siblings came here, and Panama's a whole other complexity too, but the cousins, the uncles, aunts, they never left Panama, right? And so did not grow up around any Panamanians, so it was a goal to learn Spanish. Again, I was proactive on that because a lot of kids in my situation would just give up and not pursue it, despite the rejections and stuff. I still, my dad, who's not Latino, encouraged it more than my mom, and so that was my mission from young, to take Spanish in school as opposed to French because it made more sense. And I was around other Latinos, not Panamanians, so I have more of a pan-ethnic Latino consciousness than a Panamanian one. You have to be intentional, you have to be strategic with that, and I would encourage people to do that. I know it's hard. A lot of people just give up because of those pressures that they face. And another thing, like, in growing up, being part of a folkloric group of your culture. I have a friend who's Polish American, and in New Jersey, very popular. Like, she went to Polish school,
Okay.
She's now married to a Colombian. And ideally, I feel like the kids should know Polish and Spanish. I think they understand Spanish, but I think they more know more Polish. But she had her daughter in Polish school, you know. Again, like folkloric groups, having making sure you are involved in those. If your parents don't involve you in it, you take initiative and do it yourself. You know, again, for me, being intentional about taking the language in school, doing a study abroad, when you're going places, make sure you put yourself in situations where the community or the enclave of, in my case, New Jersey, they speak exclusively Spanish, so you're keeping up with it. Even if it's not Spanish, Haitian Creole, the district I work in, heavy Haitian Creole community. Plenty of opportunities to try to stay close to your heritage by going to the store or the restaurant and ordering something in Haitian Creole, So there's so many ways, like they may have El Repertorio Español in New York, like plays in the language, parades, associations, like there's so many ways for you to be intentional and strategic about how you maintain who you are in spite of people's rejection of you, or however they want to, whatever box they want to put you in. You still have the power to do that, and that's what's a shame about this country. This is such a beautiful melting pot. This is the only country in the world where you have people from all mixes from all over the world, and it's a beautiful thing. Immigrants have shaped this country, but for some reason in America, it's just like American culture, speak English, and that's it. And to me, I think it's a shame. But like I said, I try to take the negativity and transform it into something beautiful by being an example to other people and encouraging people to do the same.
And Trisha, there's one more thing that I wanted to get your take on, because you were talking about your language services, about the translation that you used to do, also your teaching, and how you weren't exactly welcomed with open arms, so to speak, that a lot of people doubted you and a lot of people would question why you're in the room in the first place. And so I would imagine that was not a very easy experience. So from that, to anybody listening that is perhaps in the same situation, maybe also not extremely accepted in what they do, be it again being language related or be it any other field that they're in, that they see a lot of pushback, that they see a lot of that discrimination of why are you here? You're not supposed to be here. You don't look like you're supposed to be here. How did you move past that, and what would you recommend to anybody aspiring potentially to be a translator, potentially to be a language teacher, that it doesn't look the part, maybe it doesn't seem the part, but also, again, moving away from even just language teachers and translators, for any of other fields to feel comfortable within themselves, to feel confident enough to say, look, I may not look like I'm supposed to be here, but I can be, I have the merit. How would you recommend for people to do that?
and what people would find so interesting, the journey has been very interesting. When I tell people this, they may automatically assume, obviously I'm a woman of color, that I was getting this pushback from a Caucasian student audience. And don't get me wrong, that was included, but my first experience with dealing with this was from people that look exactly like me, but they were just like 100% American, like not Caribbean or Afro Latin. They're just American. So some of the comments were very disturbing, and I didn't know how to handle that. So to answer your question, how would I tell people to deal with that? I don't think I dealt with it right away, because you don't know how to deal with that when your own is doing that, like, oh my
Yeah.
God, to receive that much disrespect, and especially at the beginning of your career, that's no one trains you for that, on how to navigate and deal with that experience. So I think when I initially graduated and got that job and experienced that, I said, no, 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 no. I want to take the classroom. I think I see myself as a teacher, but not just a teacher within the classroom. I see myself as a teacher on a worldwide scale. So how could I change that mindset? Because at that time, I felt like I was the only woman of color teaching Spanish. Now you know, 20 plus years later, that's not the case. But at the time, that's how it felt. So I knew that I wanted to create an impact, because that those students in that class treated me that way because they go based on what they see in the media, they see on TV, that shapes and influences the way they think. So I want to be the change that I want to see in the world. So even though I didn't respond well to it within my 9 to 5 job, I do feel that I was proactive. I was young enough, passionate enough to take it to a different level by trying to change that mindset, by pursuing magazine publication, the restaurants, the language services that will put images of people that look exactly like me, that uh, are a significant part of Latin America, both racially and culturally, and in terms of the language, the food, the music, everything. You know, that's what I wanted to do. And at the time, I didn't think about how I could encourage other teachers to do that, because again, like I said, I thought I was the only one. But now that I'm meeting other teachers that are of color and maybe experience some of the same things, maybe not, it encourages me to want to start training programs to educate other world language teachers of color, just world language teachers, period, whether they're white, black, or even Hispanic, to change the way we help students to change the way they see people of different ethnic and cultural origins. One thing I'll throw in here too, I was at a training recently, and again, people need to, a lot of times, race, ethnicity, and culture get muffled a lot, and people seem to be confused about the difference amongst the three. They may be relative, but yet very different at the same time. So it could be very misleading. Or when we mislabel a culture or a group of people, it hinders our ability to really get to know one another in our entirety. So, for example, that student of color, I won't say what he said, but um, it was very negative. But me and him were two Black people in the classroom, but he's a Black person of the American diaspora. I'm a Black person. Yes, I'm born here, but to immigrant parents from the British West Indies and Central America. So even though we're two Black people, on the surface, it seems like we're alike. There are cultural differences, and people tend to just clump people together. It's the same thing, like two white people could be in the room, one could be Polish, the other could be Italian. They're two white people, but culturally they're different. So that's something that really has to change. So in this recent training that I went to, the lady was from Argentina, and she was talking about, even for herself, learning to appreciate the legacy of colorism in Argentina, and how historically, not just in Argentina, but all of Latin America, but just in different ways, encourage European immigration to the country to kind of whiten, the country, get rid of the Black influence, so to speak. And that really hit her, very hard. And she's an Argentinian of Armenian descent, which was interesting, because I didn't realize Argentina had Armenian influence. So that was even interesting, to learn. So she's someone that, so it's not just the Afro-Latino experience. Like, she's someone that I want to educate people to understand. She's Argentina, she's Latina, but she's also of Armenian descent. So it's a cultural duality. Like, people need to understand that when it comes to Latin America and the Caribbean, that's what you're dealing with, cultural dualities, you know. But she made a reference to that experience, and she said, yes, there were a lot of African Americans in Argentina. And right away I was like, okay, that's a little inaccurate, because for me, if someone says African Americans in Argentina, I'm thinking about American Blacks who have moved to Argentina or living in Argentina and have the Argentinian experience. That's different to someone, a group of people that were enslaved, were brought from the Spaniards to Argentina and historically have been part of the social framework of the country, are native speakers of Spanish, culturally are Latino, they're not African American. So that's where I'm saying where people need to learn to be able to distinguish between race, ethnicity, and culture, because that's very misleading. In terms of the Caribbean, sometimes when I was in my master's program, talking about the Indo-Caribbean identity, but my professor said that the publisher felt the need to say East Indians living in Trinidad or something like that. That's a big difference. Like, someone from India going to live in Trinidad is a difference between someone who is a West Indian citizen of Caribbean descent. Two different identities, because that Indo-Caribbean person will go to India and will not be accepted as being Indian, right? Um, and then in the Caribbean, maybe they won't feel like they're Caribbean enough. So it's very challenging, but very unique and rewarding experience too. Don't get me wrong. Like, I people need to be exposed to both, So, and lastly, I'll say the same thing too. Like, I used to have clients from all over at Berlitz. I had an Italian straight from Italy, and she would often talk about Italian American, like going to Little Italy and eating Italian food. And to her, that wasn't Italian food. She said it was good, but it doesn't taste like the food in Italy. Like, Italian Americans are different than Italians. So people, that's what I'm saying, people can't just look at phenotype and just clump everyone as the same. It's not a matter of making people better or less than each other, but just appreciating unique experiences, even within one race. There could be so much diversity. And so that's what I would leave this discussion with, that it's very important. I really believe that there is a beauty in embracing diversity within different races, different cultures, different heritages. And it takes a lot of work. It is challenging, but again, at the end of the day, if that's what you're passionate about, and this is God-given, like, sky's the limit. So that's how I would inspire and educate others, whether they be professionals or just everyday people.
And that's a really wonderful message, Trisha, because I feel like you said, it's not easy. It's not just, oh, now I'm
At all.
suddenly very accepting and everything is wonderful
Yes,
and butterflies and rainbows, but it
exactly.
takes a little bit of work, and it takes, like you said, that very determined, positioned mindset of, okay, this is what I am choosing to do. This is how I am choosing to think, and I am choosing to follow through with how I feel, how I think, and so on. So it's a really, really wonderful message. And for anybody that wants to follow up with you, with your potentially, like you said, your other podcasts that you've been on, or any other work that you're doing, where can people find you?
Okay, so I'm on Facebook, Trisha C-McMurray, Instagram, the handle Trisha JCM, on LinkedIn, Trisha C-McMurray. And my email, if they want to reach out to me, Trisha JC, TRISHA JC at optonline, OPTONLINE.net. And then if you want to get more in depth about my heritage and my pride and passion about what I do, I have with Simone Johnson Smith on the podcast, The Immigrant Experience in America. It's a two-part podcast interview, episodes 13 and 14. You could check out Jesse Felice's podcast, Spanish Swag podcast. You'll find, I don't remember what number mine is, but it will say Jesse Felice with Trisha C-McMurray, and you'll get to see about some of my early experiences with people of color just like me coming into the profession as a world language teacher. And Oh, and then also it's not necessarily a podcast, but more of it's Cafecito Cultural with Rosa Bell. She's a Spanish teacher out of Hawaii, originally from Panama. She's very influential, so she has her own online talk show, so to speak, for world language professionals. And last year, me and four other wonderful ladies talked about the African influence in Latin America and negotiation of identity and stuff like that, especially as world language teachers or language professionals in general. That was last November. So you could find that on PLC Culture and Diversity on YouTube.
Wonderful.
So yeah.
Wonderful, fantastic. I'll be putting all of that in the show notes. So if anybody is interested in listening to more of that, or like I said, reaching out to you, then we'll have all the details below. And Trisha, just before we finish up, do you have any final words? Anything that we perhaps didn't touch on, but something that you would still like to share?
I would just leave you with my motto that I stand by. Um, that at the end of the day, it's very important to remember that my culture matters, your culture matters, our culture matters, all cultures matter. And I'll even throw in heritages too. Cultures and heritages matter. And that's the motto that I live by. And I hope to inspire other people to live the same way and follow the same path.
Beautiful, Trisha. Thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and your life lessons with anybody that listened. And I'm sure that everybody has learned a lot from you today.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure to be here.
Hey, I'm glad to see you here. Let me know what you most enjoyed about this conversation, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one. Do zobaczenia.